welcome to episode 51 of vChat. My name's Simon Seagrove from techhead.co.
And I'm David Davis from VMwareVideos.com.
And I'm joined by our special guest live in person today from TechHead headquarters here in Westborough, Massachusetts. Analyst and long-term friend of mine, Stu Miniman. How you doing, Stu?
Simon, pleasure to be here. Welcome to the region.
Thank you very much.
To have you. I mean, literally a stone's throw from my house. Told my kids, text me if you need me. I'll be home in minutes. David, it's always good to catch up with you, even if we don't get to, see each other live and in person this time.
It's great to see you, Stu. I'm just so shocked that Simon got you like in person, the real physical Stu, because most of the time I see you, you're in a little video screen at some show around the world at the desk on the cube. And so it's just great to see you virtually, but still in person.
Yeah, you know, one of the secrets, people think we're at like every single show, and while the Cube, our organization, is at lots of them, thanks to the lovely things of Twitters and all the online and everything like that, I look like I'm personally at more shows than I am. But yeah, I'm at a lot of shows. It was nice. I've got about a week and a half that I'm home, not on a plane, in between just had a month on the road and have a few more coming up in June. And year round, it seems that, events have taken over, and that's a piece of our business. So. Yeah,
well, you've had a chaotic schedule. I mean, last time I saw you was at Dell Technologies World, and trying to get some of your time there just to say hi proves difficult, because like David was saying, every time I went to see you were interviewing someone at the Cube there, so definitely a very, very busy schedule. But I think, before we kick things off, people watching this or listening to this on the podcast who are not familiar with you, Stu, do you want to give a little bit of background about yourself? When did you get into the IT industry, and, where are you now and what do you do?
All right. Thanks, Simon. So it's funny. I'm trying to remember if it was my second or my third job before I realized I was in the IT industry. I don't know. I studied engineering went into the tech sector, loved technology, loved playing with that kind of stuff, took a number of roles working for technology vendors. The last vendor I worked for, I left 8 years ago. There was this company down the road that used to be called EMC. It was, like many other companies in Massachusetts, unfortunately, that company has ceased to be because they got acquired. So it's worked out quite well. You're with the Dell EMC family under Michael Dell's umbrella of families. But 8 years ago, I left and joined a small boutique research firm called Wikibon. And right around the time that I joined them, they had made a partnership with this other company called SiliconANGLE. And when they were starting to talk and work, it was like, well, journalists want to go deeper and analysts want to go faster. There was this idea that, hey, video and live streaming video might actually be useful. John Furrier, actually the founder of SiliconANGLE, was founded the first paid podcasting company. We wouldn't be doing podcasts like this if it wasn't for John and people like him that got that started. But they had this idea for video. It was called theCUBE.
Yes.
We did a couple of them back in 2010, and it's kind of grown from them. And last year we did over 100 events and over 1,600 interviews. I personally did about 20 events and over 400 interviews myself. So yeah, I get to talk to a lot of people. People think that I have good opinions. It's like, look, I'm just part of the community, talking to great, smart people, and try to help distill that down. And yeah, I've got my thoughts and biases just like everybody else. Yeah. And, what I would say is I consider myself a raging moderate. So I want to debate and I want to discuss it. Nothing in technology tends to be just ones and zeros or black and white. And everything that you hold true today could be proven wrong tomorrow.
Yeah, if only it was that simple. Because I actually remember when you went across to the Cube and what have you there, and I'm always amazed at how your technological sort of video setup has evolved over the years. I mean, what was the guy's name?
Risen, yes.
Risen. He was the guy that used to do all your video and audio and everything like that. So your setup wasn't far off what I've got here in the room, really, when you first started. And over the years, it's just evolved. Everything from the lighting to LED panels, just the quality of the cameras as well.
Yeah,
it's been phenomenal.
I was worried, right. We were definitely hackers in the early days, putting everything together. Yeah. Still, going live with video is a minor miracle every time it happens, but today, right, we have some of our own production gear, but we work with a lot of third-party production companies these days. I personally worry a little bit about the cameras. I don't really have much in the way of hair left.
I relate to that.
They give me a little bit of powder or anti-shine on many of the sets because boy, I mean, remember when you got your first HD TV and you saw there's certain people that you felt they could kill their careers? I worry. I could see way too much detail. It's hard enough for me to listen to myself, let alone look at myself on these things. So, yeah, that whole trajectory over the last 8 years has been an interesting one to watch.
So talking about that, Stu, how do you find it? I mean, after doing so many, you mentioned last year, 400 interviews you did.
Yeah.
Do you get used to interviewing people, but do you get used to seeing and particularly hearing yourself? Because I always cringe when I edit these up. You know, if you said that, or you know, you don't like the way you sound. I mean, does it get any easier?
No, not at all. Listening to myself or watching myself are really tough. My first couple of years, I forced myself to do it. But the other thing is, I ask lots of people for feedback. So we've got production people that will tell me, Stu, you're doing the ums a lot, or my wife will be. You know, and she's like, I don't know. You need to explain what you're talking about because we'll use those shortcuts when we understand. So there's the verbal things and then there's the physical things.
Yes.
I still know I'm still way too much of a person to be on television. Here's a tip. Next time you watch broadcast news, anything like that, watch the anchors. They are completely stiff from the neck down, and their heads don't move much and they don't make much facials, as opposed to those of us humans that talk. You try to get the just YouTube automatically grab some screenshots. We're making faces that make us look horrible. And there's a reason for that. So
but it's funny, the anchors look perfectly natural when you watch them.
They isn't it? Do, but if you actually look and watch the detail, you're like, oh no, they're more like robots than people.
Yeah.
So I sure hope I still maintain myself as a person, because otherwise the AI and everything else will take things over.
That's a matter of time, right?
They haven't taken my job just yet. I will fight against it.
Robo Stu. So Stu, how many people are behind the scenes of theCUBE at these big shows? How many people does it take?
So it varies. So if you take a big show like a VMworld or an AWS reInvent, we'll bring a team of 30 or 40 to the event, but that's 2 sets, cameramen, host there. You need to think about how much bandwidth. Me as somebody interviewing, if I'm going 3 days of interviewing people nonstop, it's pretty grueling. I've done it lots of times. If some of our guest hosts, John Troyer and Keith Townsend, the first couple of times we brought them in and they did like a full day, they're like, wow, you don't understand how much effort it takes to context switch between guests, to get ready and to keep doing it. So the thing I'd say, I haven't gotten used to listening to myself, but once you've done 1,000 interviews, the next one's not that much difficult. So interviewing executives, for me personally, I love talking to the end users. They're talking about their business. They're talking about their passion. For me, it's always about finding that area where people have expertise or passion where they can share what they've learned. And that's what people want to hear, is people like themselves or where they can learn from things. So that's, not thinking I'm giving away any, state secrets there, but it makes my life a little bit easier.
So I mean, you get to interview all these fantastic industry leaders, the end users, a real broad spectrum of, people there. From all the conversations and the shows you've been attending in the past year or so, what are the common themes you're seeing? Are there common themes, and what are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's bring it back to our world of technology here. The biggest thing for me for probably about the last year and a half has been, what is this whole thing we've been talking about, cloud? Now, not talking about arguing over what is or isn't cloud, but when you talk to users, I heard that there's, industry stat out there, 80% of companies now have a cloud strategy. And my pushback on there as well, 20% of the people, I wonder what they're doing. That 80%, really the ink is still pretty wet on whatever strategy they have. If you take somebody like some of the great thought leaders like Clay Christensen and the others, they say strategy is not something that you do long-term. Strategy is something that you will put in place and you will revisit it on a regular cadence based on feedback and whatsoever. But people saying, I've got infrastructure. And what's the role of infrastructure? Infrastructure is to run applications. And what's the role of applications? Applications are what run our business. So when I talk to companies, it's what's happening in your business. And the big thing is we are going through transformations in every industry. So that whole digital transformation has gone from a buzzword to reality, and modernizing my environment to give me the speed to be able to react to what the business needs, to be able to do what the customer needs, to start new businesses, to understand how to leverage my data. Analytics is still a huge theme. We've kind of moved beyond the discussion of, quote, big data. And it's really about, it's about my applications, it's about my data, and lots of it is going to SaaS. Lots of cool things happening in the public cloud environment, and then I've modernized the things that I would need to keep under my control, either for governance, security, or some other purpose that I need to have it in-house and have it close to what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned sort of about data there and governance and what have you. I mean, from the people you speak to there and the businesses there, you know, what's the shift to public cloud? Obviously, you know, 5 years ago, for example, everyone was saying, you know, 5 years time, everything, or, you know, 80% of everything would be running in the public cloud. Obviously, that hasn't happened. I mean, there's still a shift, admittedly, as applications get updated and you know, next gen apps get developed. You know, there's more of a shift in that space. But do you think we've hit that equilibrium now of you know, public versus private cloud, and where this data, where these applications are sitting?
Yeah, I don't think we've hit the equilibrium yet. We still see tremendous growth in the public cloud. You know, Microsoft's growing at 85% clip. Amazon's a 40 to 50% you know, growth clip. While you know, servers are actually on a bit of a growth. Simon, your background, you know the server market really well.
Yeah, love it.
The last 3 quarters have been great for the server market.
Yeah,
and it's and it's more things. You know, it's an oversimplification to say public cloud has done more compute intensive environments, where, you know, kind of the traditional data center has been more storage centric, because I've talked to lots of companies that were building the, you know, data lakes, if you will,
yes.
And a lot of those are happening in the public cloud now, and you're seeing lots of interesting applications in the public cloud. And SaaS, lots of that lives on public cloud, but lots of it also lives in service providers and other people's data centers. So it is a very fragmented market, and it's still changing very fast. You know, I remember when we tried to do forecasts on how big public cloud will be.
Yeah.
Right. Does it take 30% of the market or 80% of the market? And I don't think as an industry we still have a good, you know, feel as to what that final equilibrium will be. But I don't think we've reached it yet. Yeah. And you know, I'm still quite bullish on public cloud and the massive growth of those ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, is it a case of everything sort of bedding down and really the private versus public, well, not versus, you know, because they run in parallel, right? It's not one or the other, it's an and. You know, as an industry and businesses as a whole, do you think we're finding the best fit use case for public and private? Is that perhaps what's happening more than anything there?
Yeah, and a lot of it is, you know, I need to get my data where it's most needed and where I can access it, and where are my workers. So, you know, mobility has still been a trend that's growing great. Lots of times, you know, the front end of my application is in the public cloud, but then, you know, the repository, you know, might be in our data center. So we don't see application mobility that much, but we do see really some disaggregation of applications and functions as we pull things apart. Microservices is a huge growth. And you talk cloud native, or even, you know, hot new topic of serverless technology I've been looking at the last year or so. It is not all of it in the public or all of it in the private. It is a complicated, multi-faceted world, and things just like Amazon's making deep partnerships with companies like VMware. VMware is also partnering with companies like Google, and Google plays across the board, and Microsoft plays across both ends, and Alibaba is going to make huge moves across all of these environments. So it definitely, back to that, it's lots of shades of gray in what we're talking about in IT.
Yeah, and that's the thing with IT tech in general. Like you say, there's never zeros and ones. It's never black or white. There's always those shades of gray in between. Yeah.
Yeah, Stu, one of the shows I saw you at recently was, of course, Dell's big world conference, Dell World. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the coolest things you saw, or like interviews you did? Did you talk to Michael Dell? What was it like?
Yeah, first of all, I get to talk to a lot of people. So 2 interviews that, you know, still I was excited about. One was, of course, Michael Dell. It's actually, I've gotten to interview him a few times. It's something when, you know, I talked to my father, even though he knows who Michael Dell is, because he was in one of the Dell laptops for 20 years. So, you know, Michael, I've bumped into so many people in the last month that stopped me and were like, I've watched that interview. It was, you know, going through a broad spate of topics, everything from, you know, mentioned blockchain and like Bitcoin, you know, Michael's thoughts on Bitcoin. He's like, I'm not investing. Maybe I'm losing money on this. And it's like, well, Michael, I think you'll be just fine. To, you know, what's happening with that integrations. I mean, the largest merger, you know, acquisition in technology history. It's, you know, my background, I worked at EMC for 10 years. Simon's there now. So it's something I've watched. I've written a lot about it. I've talked a lot on it. At a macro level, it's doing well for the company. at the micro level, look, I know a lot of people that have changed jobs in the last 2 years, and that change is to be expected, but it's, once again, it's not a binary thing. There's good things, there's things that have changed, and they are making the company geared towards where they're going. The other interview that I was so excited, and it was a last-minute one, I got to interview Walter Isaacson. So if the audience doesn't know, Walter Isaacson, one of my favorite authors. I've read the last 6 biographies that he's written. He's most well known for the Steve Jobs one. My wife and I watched the National Geographic show on Einstein that was based off of one of his books. And one of my favorite books all time is The Innovators, which is the history of the computer and the internet going all the way back to Ada Lovelace. So for those of us that, have, I've got a couple decades now in tech, it talks about like, oh, well, here's when, Mosaic first launched and Mark Andreessen was working on this. It's like, oh my God, I was using that browser a month after it came out. And then, walks through, yes. Oh, well, here's where, Jobs and Wozniak were working on the Apple II and this. It's like, I had an Apple IIc. I actually got a photo with Steve Wozniak once and told him, how important, one of those early computers that I could play with and plug things in and do things. I'm a hardware guy by background, living in the software world. So, things like that, it's like when I've gotten to meet or, talk to somebody like Walter Isaacson who's met and talked in depth with all of these people. And actually, if you go listen to Walter Isaacson, it's only like a 6-minute interview. At the end of it, he actually has been talking quite a bit to Michael Dell and was telling me how, his upbringing with his parents gave him the humanities upbringing that, gives him, really the depth to not only the technology, but this. And I was like, oh my God, this sounds like chapter 1 of the Michael Dell story I was reading. So wow, never know, it might be the next book.
That could be a good read.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, fantastic. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and what about VMware? I mean, I know that one of the coolest stories you've ever told me is you were in on the review of the deal to buy VMware. Do you want to tell us that?
Actually, I was in before that. So I signed the NDA between EMC and VMware. It was one of those, there was a large financial company. I was working in the Interop lab at EMC, a couple miles down the road from where Simon and I are seeing. And it was, we had a request from this very large company that was known for taking early technology and coming to EMC and said, make it work. So it was, you guys are both, VMware guys. It was ESX 1.5.2. That was literally, we had one Linux engineer. I was the program manager, and we started testing it. I was having phone calls and meetings with Diane Green and Ed Bugnon. There were like a little more than 100 people at VMware back in the time. So I'm still, one of the things that when I get a little older in my career here, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I've watched, the tremendous, ascension of VMware from, that 100-person company to there. Year and a half after after I was working with them, EMC bought them. Yeah. I was involved in a lot of the conversations, educating people, doing deep dive NDAs. And yeah, we have a longer conversation on beer. I can tell you some of the inner workings as to how there are people that have told me if I hadn't done the things that I'd done, that wouldn't have happened. Now, I was a pretty junior guy at that time and, wasn't pulled in. It was my VP at the time. He disappeared for 2 weeks. And when he, reemerged, they bought VMware. I'm like, oh, that's where he was. I talked to Chuck Hollis once, and he's like, yeah, I got a call from Joe Tucci during that time. I had introduced Diane Green and Ed Bugnon to Chuck. And he's like, I got that call. And they're like, Joe Tucci's there. And he's like, what do you think of VMware? He's like, they're great. Why? And he's like, thanks, click. Mark Lewis was the CTO at the time. He was definitely instrumental in making that acquisition happen. So one of the best acquisitions of the decade, if not century. Yeah. It was there. I'm still amazed. We see so many technologies, and it's like, what is going to take off? Like, I remember how excited I got to the visual browser, which was when I was in college. And I showed my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and she's like, what is this toy? I'm like, no. My mind is exploding as to what we could do with it.
Yes.
I'm not sure what we will do with it, but what you could. And yeah, the VMs of the world, when we've been early on things like cloud. Docker was a company I was relatively early in watching, and it helped drive this next wave of technology. Even if Docker itself might not be the biggest success story, it's, that next generation of cloud native really owes a lot of debt to what VMware did, to what Docker did to driving innovation.
Oh, that's exciting. I mean, that's the great thing. I mean, all of us now, we're sort of getting to an age whereby we've done a number of years. I mean, I've been in there, 20 years in the IT industry. will take 5. But, you know, the things we've experienced and seen, you know, the changes in those time, I mean, the very tail end of mainframes across to, you know, client server technologies, right through to cloud, right through to, you know, this latest wave of technologies coming through. It's been absolutely phenomenal. And Stu, you know, you're getting to interview so many of these key players that have helped shape this, you know, and in some part as well, yourself, like you say, having involvement with some of this. It's the sort of thing you'll be sitting on your rocking chair on your porch when you're 90, looking back.
Yeah, they call me up and said, "Oh, you had that really instrumental video on Fiber Channel over Ethernet back in the day." It's like, those of you that have known me for a while, like, remember that stuff. It's like, it's amazing. Yeah. It doesn't take a lot for somebody actually to have an impact. I mean, you know, I remember, you know, I used to be a blogger. I don't blog that much. I do write for my day job. But, you know, podcasts and videos, you can reach phenomenal markets, and it just a little seed can help, you know, the butterfly wings across the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the exciting thing about IT, isn't it? I mean, it's never changing. I could not work in an industry that's stagnant. And that's what I love. I mean, sometimes it's challenging, right? Because you've got to keep your skills, you know, up to scratch, and you've got to read like anything, whether that be online or physical books. And you know, it's challenging, but at the same time, that's the exciting part of this industry and being part of it.
Well, and actually, but you bring up the counterpoint to that. I've read a bunch of Walter Isaacson's point, and I wish I had had time to ask him this question, but I posted it on LinkedIn too with the video that I posted, is if you read about these brilliant minds out there, they reach a point where they stop, you know, the next thing. It was like Einstein, you know, revolutionized physics, but when it came to, you know, quantum, you know, mechanics theory, it's like God doesn't play, you know, with probability. That's ridiculous. So he fought against it for decades and would not believe in it because it was the new thing. There's always people that was like, you know, this works and I know how it is, and you know, that new thing, you know, hogwash. You're gonna pry it away from my cold dead hands.
Yes.
You know, we all reach a point where it'd be easier just to keep doing what you're doing, and you know, it's challenging to always wanting to be learning and moving forward. There's so much there. Yeah, Simon, you got to tell me about these VR visors and things we can do one of these days.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll give you a demo. We'll do a few.
We need a show on that, on VR visors. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of shows, I mean, and new innovations, tell us about some shows maybe you've been to or you're planning to go to that, you know, you get excited about, the new innovations that are coming out. I mean, I saw you recently, I think, at OpenStack Summit, you know, I mean, KubeCon, DockerCon. What are you excited about? What do we need to know about?
All right, so yeah, first of all, yeah, it's go to a lot of shows. So there's always kind of a life cycle of shows, and every year there's usually like, oh, here's the cool new thing. So like, I was at the first DockerCon back in 2014, and to be able to sit front row and listen to engineers from Yahoo and Google explain how they architect this massively scalable thing, you know, I think I understood about a quarter of what they were saying, and it blew my mind. It was just phenomenal. This year, you know, DockerCon's a little smaller. We will have presence there, but you know, it's a shame that I can't be at every show. But then again, it's really okay that I can't be at every show. Yeah, the con show's really cool. Really at that stage of where many of the people there are either helping to build the tools or, you know, involved enough that they're building their own thing. So still really in that early adopter phase. Really, really smart audience, really fascinating things that they're doing, phenomenal stuff. And I've been to, you know, we've done a couple of those now. Serverless is something that I've been really interested in. I actually got to Serverless Conf, which is run by a company, A Cloud Guru, was in New York City when I happened to be there last year. And I was only there for 2 hours, and I did 7 interviews, and like they were still some of my favorite interviews of the year. I had Simon Wardley on, who's just a phenomenal thought leader guy I've gotten to talk to a couple times. But the first time I got to interview him, talk to a couple of startups, talk to iRobot, you know, talk about cool companies, how they're using that technology. And they're actually going to be again in San Francisco this summer. And turns out I'm actually coming back from vacation. I was going to spend a couple days in San Francisco. So I got the pass from my wife and kids to come spend a couple hours doing it again. So, you know, those things. The other thing I want to mention is what I've loved sometimes is to go do a conference that's outside of the normal kind of tech world. There's innovation conferences I've gone to. We've done some events with MIT and with Stanford, which just expand your mind and really get you thinking. And I love shows that actually pull in those kind of thought leaders and guests. So, you know, we're doing an event with PTC in Boston in a couple of weeks, talking about IoT and the like that have things like that. Nutanix actually does a really good job bringing in some good thought leaders and speakers. Actually, Dell even had Ashton Kutcher, who I've seen a number of times and I thought gave the best presentation I've seen him do, which wasn't just him doing gadgets and stuff, but his philosophy as an investor. He's an engineer by training. It was cool things. So
that was good. I was backstage actually. I was fortunate just to meet him very, very briefly, just in passing. But yeah, I mean, he really struck me as he's very tall, by the way. He must be like 6'5" easily. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that session he did there was absolutely fantastic. I mean, originally, not that this isn't really known, but he was only supposed to be on the stage for the first part, and it was only 5 or 10 minutes beforehand. He actually said, no, actually, I want to stay for the whole thing. So he actually staying for the entire session there, and it was brilliant. I mean, how he wrapped it up at the end. And I mean, I wasn't aware that himself and his previous wife there had started the charity there.
Yeah, the charity. Right. So him and Demi Moore, and they were using technology to find people that are child, sex slave type things, and because online they could use tools to track down the ads, track down the people, shut it down, put people in jail. I mean, talk about a great way to leverage technology to do good for the world. Which, by the way, the other thing is I've loved this trend the last few years. A lot of shows, they have charities there, not just to say we give money, but you can participate. I mean, I've put, build the backpack and put it together, do food things, carry water, there's all these things. And it's good to get us because at the end of the day, right, we're in the tech industry, but connecting back to those transformations in the broader world, if we're not making the world a better place, we better be doing more than just making ad clicks a little bit better.
Yeah. Totally. And it's sort of going back to what you were saying there about some of the innovation conferences you attend this year. I mean, I was fortunate enough this year, at the start of the year, to attend CES for the first time. And that was interesting. I mean, parts of it was more like a car show, to be honest with you. I mean, but it gave you a real insight into what's coming. You had all the large players there. I mentioned cars. So, for example, you had Toyota, Ford. You had all the consumer or residential electronics firms, everything from LG, Sony, all the usual players there. But for me, when I was attending at the Sands Conference Center, down in the basement area there, the most interesting part of that show were the small startups that had their tiny little booth down there and were pitching these ideas. And some of the ideas you went round were mind-blowing. They were the type of things that you would see what they were doing and goes, God, that makes perfect sense. It's the type of thing, the aha moments where, someone comes out with a great idea and you go, well, that makes perfect sense. Why didn't I think about that? That multi-million-dollar idea there. But there were so many of these, these little startups are struggling for funding. That's obviously, through everything they had, having a booth or a presence at CES. And that was incredibly interesting because there was a lot of great innovation coming out from those small players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's another thing in my job. I get to talk to a lot of startups. So, interesting space. Of course, you go to Silicon Valley, every one of them is going to change the world overnight, disrupt, billions of dollars of market, and some of them, make progress. So,
yeah, definitely. So one area there we spoke of, obviously we're talking about sort of new technologies coming through. Talking about transformation or what have you there, Stu. What emerging technologies are you seeing? What really interests you? What do you think is going to stay? I mean, some of these emerging technologies, they're going to be flash in the pan. People are kicking the tires on the ideas. Some will last. Some are going to be quite transformatory.
Yeah, it's a big question, Simon. I tend to be, fans of the wave and, the simplification of IT. How do we allow, small companies to take advantage of things that before only, state agencies or, huge global companies could do? That was actually some of the promise of big data initially, but, you're really seeing that from the analytics space. I'm not heavily deep into the AI ML stuff and still am a little bit skeptical on some of those. I think it was back to that Walter Isaacson's book, Ada Lovelace was like, well, if I could actually write it as a program, it's not actually artificial intelligence because, it goes against the definition of what it is. So,
that's true.
But we really start to see, we're having conversations about intelligence where it is very different than we were having 10 years ago. Even, you know, back at the Dell show, I talked to some, you know, old school, hardcore, you know, symmetrics engineers. And when you ask them that question about why is the intelligence in the system now, their eyes light up and they get so excited because they're like, oh, you know, I've been beating against this with 7 generations of ASICs and code and things like that. Now this thing does like trillions of decisions and I didn't have to, you know, put that logic in place.
Yes.
It learns and it understands. So, and going back to like what you said at CES, still that line between the consumer and the enterprise, you know, it does blur. It's to, you know, come on, storage is all free and, you know, infinite compute and that's going to open up a lot of things.
Yeah, I actually think it's quite exciting. I mean, it's like the, you know, working remotely or working from home. I mean, I really think it's the consumer technologies that are helping drive that. You know, I mean, I know, well, a number of years ago, for example, when I was a systems admin, prior to that, I was doing IT support and what have you. Quite often, what we were seeing, the iPhones had first come out then, and the execs wanted iPhones at work. But we were finding they knew about the iPhones just because they were using these products at home. And, you know, you started having streaming, this, that, and the other thing. And they said, well, why can't we do this, you know, at work, at the office? So a lot of the, you know, the more the residential or the consumer space technologies, just through people's exposure to them, you know, does bubble up eventually through into enterprise. Obviously, lots of things a lot larger than phones and streaming TV.
The thing, you know, so I'll give the other. I sold video conferencing gear back in the '90s. I worked for it was actually one of the divisions of what used to be Lucent, now Avaya, but you know, PictureTel and Polycom. And, you know, there was this vision of ubiquitous video. And here we are using, you know, a good, you know, relatively low cost video solution. But, you know, we still aren't there yet. You know, my kids definitely use FaceTime more than I do. The promise of 5G is, you know, hey, we might eventually get rid of Wi-Fi and just have ubiquitous bandwidth that allow us to use this, but it's still not there. And, you know, there's great high-end video. When last company I worked at, I used to use the telepresence, and that was phenomenal.
Yes.
You know, you'd get at a meeting with somebody in Europe, and they'd get up to shake your hand at the end of the meeting. It was so good.
Wow.
You know, from you know, thousands of miles away. But you know, in general, we've got low end, you know, kind of free-ish, and very high end. But it's not like, you know, I don't expect tomorrow or next year that we're going to be sitting in our self-driving cars having, you know, live streaming video conversations with somebody else. But, you know, in our lifetime, maybe.
Oh, I think so. I don't think we're too far off there, actually. I would, I'm actually, you know, the older I get, the lazier I'm getting with the driving, right? I welcome the self-driving car. Because, I mean, it's fantastic. Those folks that, you know, drive an hour and a half to work because of traffic. It's ideal. I mean, cars, if you think about it, you could just sit in the car, you know, just taking one of the examples there, Stu, with a table. So your car would have comfortable seats, a table, just work. And so it's not lost productivity time going in and coming out of the office every day. I mean, I think it sounds fantastic.
We need self-driving cars to prevent accidents. I mean, because so many people are texting while they drive. Just driving in this morning, I was looking around, and just about every car I looked at, somebody is just looking at a cell phone while they're driving and texting. I'm thinking we need these self-driving cars faster before, you know, to prevent these kind of accidents.
Yeah, David, you are so right, because people are always like, well, you know, the computers aren't perfect yet. And I'm like, yes, but have you seen people?
Right. I mean,
I totally agree. Still, I really feel for Tesla, actually, because Tesla are really, you know, they're leading the charge, right? They're the spearhead of this technology. But every Tesla car that has something that vaguely resembles an accident, it's all over the press. Yeah. And when you compare to the amount of people, you know, people-led or caused accidents every day, compared to the, you know, the amount of cars on the road that are semi-autonomous. I won't say autonomous because they're still semi-autonomous. I mean, it's a much smaller number, I'd almost say.
There's been lots of studies done that most people think that they are more intelligent than they actually are. And I know that most people think that they're a better driver than they actually are. Because if you ask anybody if they are a good driver, they will say yes. And they will say, what do you think about other people on the road? And they'll say, oh, well, like 80% of the people on the road are complete idiots, texting, doing something else and everything. And I'm like, okay, wait, if 90% of the people think they're good drivers, yet everybody agrees that 80% of the people are bad drivers, math doesn't work. You know, so
well, exactly. And I mean, you know, down this scale here, you can have a whole range of people, right? You can have good drivers down here, right through to bad drivers at the other end, or reverse that rather. But at least with autonomous vehicles, you're going to have a sort of a median or you know, a much smaller median as to the quality or the standard of driving on the road. So to my way of thinking, that can be a bad thing.
Yeah, it takes a long time for the technology, the reality of the technology to catch up with the hype, you know, whether it's consumer or enterprise, it seems like. And in the meantime, when the technology isn't quite, you know, hasn't met up with the hype yet, it gets bashed, I guess, like the self-driving car. At least that's my take.
We could have implemented roads in the 70s that would allow self-driving cars to actually work.
Yeah.
Took a civil engineering course as an undergrad, which was over 20 years ago, and they explained exactly how we could have built it, you know, decades before that. But it's, you know, getting through the people. It's just like, you know, well, we're not getting everybody to ride, you know, public transit. Well, you know, there's public policy. There's all these other things. Gosh, something, you know, as a technology person, it's like, oh, wait, I need to get governments involved. We need to sort this out. You know, we didn't talk about drones or anything like that. It's like the technology is pretty much here, but, you know, we don't want those things buzzing all over the place. My sister, who lives right outside of Boston, already had one crash through her window.
Oh, wow.
She like, I'm like, hey, that's a really nice GoPro you have there. And she sold it on eBay because they never got it.
Paid for the window.
But I paid for the window. And, it's right. There's so many kind of levels to really make change that it's sometimes a little bit frustrating.
Yeah. But I mean, I think one technological area that is emerging that is definitely getting traction is the area of IoT. I think we're definitely there now. I mean, you know, the components are getting small enough, they're getting cheap enough. You know, whether that be enterprise, whether it be consumer. You know, that's one area that I think is definitely.
As long as you don't care about security or malware or anything like that.
We're all minor points. No, that's
surface area of attack and how old is that device? Can we update the firmware on it? No, don't worry about it.
No, it's very true. I mean, obviously you need a very decent sort of management.
So our research arm, Wikibon, GE actually came to us and we did the initial work and forecast for the industrial internet conversation. So $1 trillion opportunity, but when you go talk to the engineers, it's like, oh my God, there's years worth of challenges that we will need to sort through. You know, you've got API creep, you've got all of these different transport layers, multiple open source versions out there. And so, yes, I absolutely a huge wave. Edge computing, you know, we could spend another hour talking about that. Edge does not kill the cloud, just like cloud did not kill the data center or anything like that. But yeah, it's, you know, really so many, Simon, as you said, luckily we don't have a shortage of, you know, cool things to talk about.
To your point there, I totally agree, Stu. I mean, you know, really the evolution or the implementation of IoT has definitely got to be in lockstep and hand in hand with security. I mean, security, I always think it is played down a lot, or rather selectively ignored. I mean, it's in my whole career in IT, I always feel it plays second fiddle somewhat, but even, you know, more so in a connected world that we live in now. I mean, I think security is more paramount than ever, especially with IoT.
So here's what I'd say. 20 years ago, I said security was top of mind, bottom of budget. And today it is still top of mind and way higher up on the budget. It is something that is a board level conversation. It is in every single event I go to. You know, so, you know, security, absolutely huge. There is such a huge industry around this, but we haven't made as much progress as we want. When I became an analyst 8 years ago, it was my joke was I can just go into anything and be like, oh, well, monitoring and security are still a problem. And it's like, you know, here we are 8 years later, and, you know, you can still kind of beat on that horse.
Yeah. It was always something that was tacked on at the end, wasn't it? And also, have you considered security?
Security is everyone's problem. Every level, every part, need to think it holistically. There is no silver bullet because security is not a solution. Security is a practice.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
Unfortunately, it's an afterthought.
I heard that from one of my guests on the
I tell you what, I'm going to have to write that one down, actually. Use that more.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But you're right. Unfortunately, it's an afterthought.
You know, it's been set on the cube. So.
Oh, there we go.
Well, Stu, we've got a lot of links that I need to add to the show notes. Ashton Kutcher, a lot of, you know, interviews that you've done with great people like Michael Dell. We're running out of time here, I know, in our time slot. Where can people find you on the social media, and where will we see you, you know, like what shows later this year?
All right. So yeah. So first of all, easiest website is thecube.net, which is where all the videos have. That has the list of upcoming shows and past shows. I'm still partial to the Twitters, so I'm just STU on Twitter. So you know,
still find it amazing you've got that handle.
When I worked in the vendor world, I actually went by Stuart, but then I got the Twitter handle, and so everybody calls me Stu. So you're all my high school buddies. So it's all. So yeah, easy there. You know, of course I'm on LinkedIn. Facebook I keep only for kind of friends and family to talk about my kids and Star Wars and things like that. But please, you know, hit me up on, you know, LinkedIn or Twitter, or, you know, check out thecube.net. It's easy to contact us on that. And well, shows this year, I'm going to be at a lot of shows, David. So I'm going back to Cisco Live for the first time. Actually, since I was working at EMC, I remember Chad Sakic and me doing like blogger roundtable videos.
Oh,
and
wow,
like,
going back away.
you know, at Cisco Live, like 2009 was the last time I was at the US show. So that's coming up in June. Doing some of the regional AWS things, like AWS's public sector. Of course, VMworld's, you know, big on my agenda. KubeCon at the end of the year in Seattle, I will be at. And I'm sure a dozen other shows that just aren't top of mind, but lots of shows.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Hopefully we'll catch up with you at least, well, one of those, VMworld at least. I know I'm attending now.
Yeah.
Hey, question, you mentioned Star Wars, SG. Have you had a chance to see Solo yet?
Oh, I'm going this weekend, so
I've heard really good things about it, so you're going to have to let us know.
Yeah, so the last point I'll make is there's always, you know, people have, David, you mentioned, you know, expectations that aren't quite right. So, you know, Solo only made, you know, 85 million in the first, you know, official weekend. I think 100 million if you include Memorial Day. It did not reach what the experts said that it should. I'm like, did pretty good. And my friends that are big Star Wars fans all liked it. So it's kind of ridiculous. My general rule of thumb is as long as they don't mess up Chewbacca, I'm going to be happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't love 7 and 8 so far, but I loved Rogue One. I'm looking forward to Solo. I still watch it, and it's been a joy to be able to share this new generation of stuff with my kids.
Same as I mean, I've Thomas, my son, he's coming up for 5 at the moment. So I was 6 when I first saw Star Wars when it first came out in '77. So I've managed to get an agreement from my wife that when Tom's 6, I can show him the first Star Wars movie. So I'm just absolutely busting to show him, to introduce him to Star Wars as well. He's already introduced because he already plays Star Wars Lego and what have you. But
so just which order are you going to show them to him in?
Oh, well, there's only one way, isn't it?
Very controversial.
Yeah, I'll start at 4, work forwards, ignore the first 3.
Yeah, right. There's the machete order, but yeah, 4, 5, and 6 you
4,
definitely
5, 6,
start with.
Yep.
Or as what I read once, it was a great line, probably from Twitter, of course. It was episodes 4, 5, and 6 shall be referred to as the original trilogy, and episodes 1, 2, and 3 shall not be referred to.
I agree with that.
Wise words indeed. Well, Stu, it's been great to see you. Great to finally catch up, and particularly, you know, real treat because got caught up with you.
All right, so sometime in the next 10 years, you'll get me on again.
We'll do it again. We'll do it much sooner than that. But thanks a lot, Stu. Great to see you, David. And
great to see you, Stu and Simon. Thanks for being on, Stu. I'll see you at VMworld, most likely.
Cheers, guys.